Welcome back, everybody. It's the Fantasy Football Strategist here. In today's video, we are breaking down part 2 of second-year wide receiver expectations. In part 1, I did the big 5, and I looked at average increases in targets, receptions, yards, and touchdowns from year 1 to year 2 for wide receivers. Now, keep in mind that these guys are players that either we expected to produce and didn't, or produced when we really didn't expect them to, but it's not necessarily a given that we see these exact increases in production. This video is more for fun. It's based on averages, and it's a lot more nuanced. There's free agent signings, new draft picks, competition in the depth chart, injuries. There are all sorts of things, coaching changes included, that could affect year 1 to year 2 production with these wide receivers. So keep that in mind, that while these are averages, I'm not saying that these are going to be the exact increases in production. The first player we're going to take a look at here is Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs. He had a record-breaking 4.21 40-yard dash time. That's in the 100th percentile. But he is really small, so that gives him a height and weight-adjusted speed score in the 78th percentile, to go along with his very impressive 96th percentile burst score. He also had a good catch radius. Didn't do the agility drills necessary, but he's a pretty agile player. Now, when you take a look at his end-of-season production on the top right here, he finished as the wide receiver 33 overall as a rookie in 17 full games. On 98 targets, he had 59 receptions, 638 receiving yards, and 6 receiving touchdowns. He did have some additional rushing yardage and touchdowns as well. He was missed time and time again by Mahomes on these deep routes, or he could have had a much more impressive rookie season. Now, taking a look at some advanced stats here, his air yards of 904 ranked 48th in the NFL. His air yard share of 23.7% ranked 59th. His ADOT of 9.2 is 72nd. That was much higher at the beginning of the season, but after the injury to Rashee Rice, that shrunk significantly and is given more volume. However, his 17 deep targets still ranked 33rd in the NFL. That's pretty solid. His 18 red zone targets ranked 10th in the NFL, which is pretty impressive. And I'd consider him reasonably unlucky, considering he only had 6 receiving touchdowns, given he was 10th in total red zone targets. That's about a 33% conversion rate on those. His target quality rating of 5.00 was 59th. Now, some of these deep routes and deep targets were very, very off by Mahomes this year. Hopefully, they can get that connection working a little bit better deep down the field. I think that he's probably going to be used more deep down the field than he was this past season in the second half, with the return of Rashee Rice and the addition of Jalen Royals in the NFL draft. Taking a look at his yards per out run, his 1.32 were 76th, not particularly great. His .89 formation adjusted yards per out run was 88th, also not that great. His yards per target of 6.5 ranked 94th, not that great. His yards per reception of 10.8 ranked 88th. Once again, that was much higher at the beginning of the season. His yards per team pass attempt of 1.06 ranked 69th. But when you take a look at his target separation, his 2.06 ranked 10th. Now, considering his ADOT shrunk tremendously, this really does go to show how good he is at winning horizontally and immediately in the short passing game. He's used in motion time and time again, almost never faced press coverage, which is great for his skills, given he's pretty small. So the target separation is pretty impressive in my opinion. His target premium of plus 7.5% was 46th in the NFL. His dominator rating of 19.9%, which is his market share of the yards and touchdowns, was 50th. His juke rate of 16.5% is pretty high. I suspect that there's not enough of a sample size for them to grade him compared to the other players in this class, or at least anybody from this past season. And his explosive rating of 80 ranked 70th in the NFL. I'm going to make this point time and time again that while these are average increases in production, these are no guarantee. It is situational, it is nuanced, and I'm not saying, once again, that these exact increases will happen from this past season to this season. But on average, players, being receivers specifically, going from year 1 to year 2, see a 12% increase in targets, a 14% increase in receptions, a 17% increase in yards, and a 13% increase in total touchdowns. Now, this past season, as you can see on the bottom left, Xavier Worthy finished in the 20th percentile in terms of success rate versus man coverage. Not very good, but 64th percentile in success rate against zone. He does have a good feel for zone coverage, and a 16th percentile success rate against press coverage. You want to get this guy free releases. You don't want him facing press coverage. He can smoke man coverage horizontally. Vertically, he can as well, but it's much more easy for him horizontally. Now, taking a look at his production from this past season compared to this season, what we might be able to expect. This past season, he had 98 targets, 59 receptions, 638 receiving yards, and 9 total touchdowns, 6 being receiving. If we take those and increase those with the averages here, we could theoretically expect 110 targets, 67 receptions, 746 receiving yards, and 10 total touchdowns, which would, based on how receivers finished this past season, would make him the wide receiver 27 overall back in 2024. If we could expect high-end wide receiver 3 production, I think we'd be pretty happy from Xavier Worthy, especially given that Rashee Rice is probably coming back. They signed or drafted Jalen Royals, rather. Hopefully we can see a little bit more from him. We did see multiple times, like I said, where Mahomes missed him deep, where he could have had a significantly higher amount of receiving yards and a couple more deep touchdowns. But overall, if you drafted Xavier Worthy, I think you were pretty happy. The second receiver we're going to look at here is Keon Coleman of the Buffalo Bills. I was telling everybody this past season he was a huge avoid because they were going to misuse him. He definitely has strengths to his game. I think he would be much better as a big slot. He has ridiculous mitts that corral just about anything in his catch radius. The issue is he does not separate vertically whatsoever. He's not good against press coverage, and he did struggle against zone coverage. So all these things put together really just don't paint the picture of somebody that would be a good vertical X. But the Bills said, big man, big. And so he was their vertical X. Now, taking a look at his production, in 13 games, he was the wide receiver 71 overall. On 57 targets, he had 29 receptions, 556 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns, which was an impressive 19.17 yards per catch. I will say he produced rather impressively considering he was being misused and didn't have a ton of target volume. But I really think as a big slot, they would have utilized him more so to his skills. Now, taking a look at some advanced stats here, his 864 air yards ranked 52nd, his air yard share of 28.4 ranked 36th, his ADOT of 15.2 ranked 8th in the NFL. So once again, these targets way deep down the field are much more difficult to corral, and he's just not being used to his strengths. It's kind of like Marvin Harrison, where you would prefer Marvin Harrison run the in-breakers, the digs, the slants, instead of just running these fades and go balls down the sideline. Gross misutilization of them. His 18 deep targets ranked 25th, his 10 red zone targets ranked 44th, but his target quality rating of 10.81 ranked first in the entire NFL, which is pretty impressive and really goes to show how awesome Josh Allen is. Looking further into some more advanced stats here, his yards per out run of 1.81 ranked 50th, his formation adjusted yards per out run of 1.49 ranked 48th, his yards per target of 9.8 ranked 13th, his yards per reception of 19.2 ranked 4th, very impressive. His yards per team pass attempt of 1.43 were 52nd. Now, his target separation of 1.07 ranked 103rd. Like I said, he just doesn't separate vertically. It's like in this class, I think Jaden Higgins being asked to be a vertical X was just a terrible idea because he doesn't separate vertically and he's bad against press coverage. Keon Coleman is a very similar player. You put these guys in the slot and they are dominant ball winners and they will out-muscle you for the ball. It's just not the best utilization to have these guys running the vertical plane on the outside. His dominator rating of 17.9% was 62nd. His juke rate of 13.3% is pretty impressive. I think the sample size is somewhat limited given why they don't have him ranked here. And his explosive rating of 116 also doesn't have a ranking, but that's a relatively good number. Now, taking a look at the bottom left-hand portion of your screen at some of these success rates, like I said, they really were not very impressive. But once again, he was being misused. When you're misused, your numbers are going to look way worse. He had a 3rd percentile success rate versus man coverage. That is obviously abysmal. A 23rd percentile success rate versus zone. Like I said, he doesn't separate vertically down the field. He's not good against press coverage or zone coverage. And against press, he was 8th percentile. So this guy produced relatively decent stats per 17-game pace, considering, he was used as poorly as you could possibly imagine. So, given the average increases in receptions, yards, touchdowns, and targets, taking a look at his rookie season, a 17-game pace, remember he only played 13 games, would have been 75 targets, 38 receptions, 727 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns, which the yards, considering the amount of targets and receptions, would have been incredible in my opinion. But given these average increases, we could theoretically expect if he plays a full season, 84 targets, 43 receptions, 851 receiving yards, and 6 receiving touchdowns, which, based on how receivers finished in 2024, would make him the wide receiver 44 overall. Not exactly what we're looking for. You would potentially hope that the touchdowns increase because he is very good in the red zone, but nonetheless, quite the disappointing season from a production standpoint, but I really do think it's explained by his usage. Moving on to the third receiver we're going to discuss here, it's Xavier Legette of the Carolina Panthers. Now, as far as being an athlete, he's an incredible athlete. He had a 94th percentile 40-yard dash time, a 98th percentile speed score, an 89th percentile burst score. Didn't do the agility drills. I don't think he would have performed relatively well. He's more of your linear athlete than necessarily the most agile guy, but he also had an 86th percentile catch radius. Then moving on to his production, he only played in 16 games, and he finished as the wide receiver 61. On any 4 targets, he had 49 receptions, 497 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns on 10.14 yards per catch. Overall, the production was rather lackluster. He was also another guy I was telling people to fade because, the 5th-year breakout is just generally a little bit worrisome, although he definitely had some contextual things you needed to add to his profile given the unfortunate deaths of his parents, having to change positions. So there's definitely some added context to his late breakout, but nonetheless, he was a little bit raw. And, he was used as a flanker to a degree at the beginning of the season, but then once Deontay Johnson was cut, he really was forced to move to X, and that's just not good for him. So I do think that he would have produced a lot better if he wasn't misused in the second half of the season, but I think he was misused out of necessity rather than Dave Canales not knowing what he's doing. And taking a look at some advanced stats here, his air yards of 1,030 ranked 36th, his air yard share of 24.1% ranked 54th, his ADOT of 12.3 ranked 29th, his deep targets of 19 ranked 21st, his red zone targets of 12 ranked 34th, and his target quality rating of 5.34 ranked 40th. His yards per out run of 1.22 were 84th, his formation adjusted yards per out run of 0.92 were 83rd, his yards per target of 5.9 ranked 98th, his yards per reception of 10.1 ranked 97th, and his yards per team pass attempt of 0.96 ranked 79th. Now, his target separation of 1.39 ranked 77th. I do think, though, that he separates a lot more easily on, routes like crossers and goes, things that allow him to run in a straight line rather than having to run more technical routes. Like I said, he's more of your linear athlete than just the most dynamic horizontal, an agile type of athlete. Taking a look at his dominator rating is 17.6%, ranked 66th. His 18.2% juke rate is pretty impressive. I will say he is definitely underrated after the catch, and his explosive rating of 88.8 ranked 57th. Overall, I think that he was misutilized at the second half of the season. I think he's going to be allowed to be more so the flanker that he needs to be to succeed at the NFL level in this Dave Canales offense. And as odd as it seems, I think the addition of Ted McMillan is really going to help him. And so if you take a look at the bottom left-hand portion of your screen at his success rates, like Keon Coleman, they just weren't very impressive, but like Keon Coleman, I also think he was grossly misused, but this time out of necessity rather than just an inability to understand your player's strengths and weaknesses and utilize them properly. Taking a look at his success rate versus man, he was 35th percentile. Taking a look at his success rate versus zone, it was 26th percentile. And his success rate versus press coverage was 17th percentile. This guy needs to be a flanker off line of scrimmage. You could throw him in the slot too. Really, just do not put him on the line of scrimmage. He's just not adept at winning press coverage. Now, taking a look at his 17-game pace, remember, he only played in 16 games. He would have had 89 targets, 52 receptions, and 528 receiving yards with 4 total receiving touchdowns. If we use these average increases in production, we could theoretically see numbers such as 100 targets, 59 receptions, 618 receiving yards, and 5 receiving touchdowns, which, if he finishes with those stats, would have made him the wide receiver 46 overall back in 2024. Not exactly what we're looking for. I will say there's more touchdown upside with this guy, and I do think, though, that we should see a jump in production from year 1 to year 2 because the addition of Ted McMillan, he is going to be able to play the vertical X role in this offense, and I think he's going to free up Xavier Legette for targets that are more suited to his strengths. And I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Mage Shack, and Infamy MTG. If you would like to become a Patreon member, the link's going to be below in the comment section. There we're going to have weekly live streams where we go over, fantasy news, potential buy low candidates, sell high candidates, depending on the news. We're going to give you specific league-oriented roster construction with trade advice based on your specific league settings there. We're going to give you access to early videos. We're going to give you the ability to suggest videos as well. I made a private video for someone on Isaac Rendo, some of the pluses, minuses to his game, things to like, and specific price points to sell or buy for. You're also going to find that we are working on a model with predictive capability for running backs quarterbacks, tight ends, and wide receivers based on a variety of specific metrics, minimums and maximums to be in an acceptable range for us in fantasy that will be predictive and lead us to being able to be more successful, we think, than the average person in determining which prospects based on these thresholds are likely to hit or unlikely to hit. And we're also going to be updating that each and every single year with the new prospects so that we can continuously have the best model possible. So once again, if you'd like to become a member, the link's going to be below in the comment section. Thanks. Now, the fourth player we're going to take a look at here is Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers. Now, he was one of my favorite first-round picks, specifically because he was drafted to the 49ers. I think he is a great fit for the Deebo Samuel role. Now, taking a look at his athleticism, it's actually remarkable. He's a 92nd percentile 40-yard dash, a 72nd percentile speed score, which is height and weight adjusted speed, a 98th percentile burst score, a 97th percentile agility score, and a 99th percentile catch radius. Say what you want, but he is a very good athlete, and I really think it shows up after the catch more so than before the catch. He doesn't separate as much as I would like, especially for somebody with this amazing athletic profile. Now, taking a look at his stats, it's a little bit misleading because, yes, he technically played 11 games, but, he was dealing with an injury. He was shot. So, he finished as the wide receiver 82 overall, 46 targets, 31 receptions, 400 yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. But in the past 2 games, or the last 2 games of the season, rather, he produced in a massive way, especially in week 17 against the Detroit Lions. I really think we can expect good things from him, especially with the departure of Deebo Samuel. And so taking a look at some advanced stats here, his 320 air yards were 102nd. He was 82nd in air yard share, 96th in ADOT, 103rd in deep targets, 71st in red zone targets, 61st in target quality rating, 34th in yards per out run, which I think is more indicative because some of these other things are more so counting stats as opposed to just efficiency stats. His formation adjusted yards per out run of 1.78 was 30th, pretty impressive considering the slow start to the season and being shot. His yards per target was 35th. He was 47th in yards per reception, 65th in yards per team pass attempt, 108th in target separation. Now, he doesn't really separate as much traditionally through, suddenness and explosion as somebody with his athletic profile might suggest. He's more so technically precise. I think he has a decent release package. But yeah, the target premium was 49th. He was 48th in dominator rating. He did not have a juke rate whatsoever, so I find that kind of interesting. And his explosive rating of 92.2 also did not have a grade, I think due to sample size. Overall, I think this is a lost season, but I really did like some of what I saw. And like I said, at the end of this season, he really did come out and he showed up big time for us. Now, like I said, I liked what I saw from him, and so did Matt Harmon. If you take a look at the bottom left-hand portion of your screen, he was 58th percentile against man coverage, 83rd in zone success rate, and 76th percentile in success rate versus press coverage. I will say I like the balance of all 3 of these being over the 50th percentile, and I really like the zone percentile here. He has obviously no problems finding the soft spots in zone. Separating more so versus man coverage is a little bit less of a positive for him, but nonetheless, it wasn't such an abysmal rate like some of these other guys that I really don't have any concerns for him long term, especially as he becomes more acclimated to the offense. Now, taking a look at the 17-game pace, he would have had 71 targets, 48 receptions, 618 yards, and 5 receiving touchdowns. Using these average increases, we could theoretically see production in 2025, such as 80 targets, 55 receptions, 723 receiving yards, and 6 receiving touchdowns, which would put him as the wide receiver 43 overall in 2024. I think we could definitely see more production from than this, especially if, Brandon Ayuk isn't able to start out the beginning of the season, the departure of Deebo Samuel. I do think that we could see a much larger target share in general for Ricky Pearsall. I think he and Kittle could dominate the passing game. We'll see what's left of Christian McCaffrey. Nonetheless, I liked what I saw from Ricky, and I'm pretty hopeful. Now, moving on to the 5th of 6 wide receivers that we'll be discussing in this video, we have Jalen Coker of the Carolina Panthers. He was somebody that I was saying to target pre-draft because the state of the Panthers receiver core was laughable, and he had a good athletic profile. Obviously, he did not come from some dominant college, so being an undrafted free agent signing, it was always risky, but he was free after rookie draft, so he was a great pickup. He has 42nd percentile 40-yard dash time, but 58th percentile height and weight adjusted speed, 98th percentile burst score. He had, I believe, a 42-inch vertical, very impressive, and it does show up on the field. And then a 98th percentile catch radius. Now, taking a look at his production, he only played 11 games. He finishes the wide receiver 83. But, 46 targets, 32 receptions, 478 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns on 14.94 yards per catch, I might add. It's pretty impressive for an undrafted free agent, especially given the kind of mixture of quarterbacks that we saw. In the beginning of the season, we had Bryce Young. Then we had Andy Dalton come in before Bryce Young came back in. Bryce Young did look very good at the end of this year. Now, I will say with Jalen Coker, the addition of Ted McMillan does worry me somewhat because while I do think he's going to be an X, I think Legette's going to be more so your Z, your flanker. And then, you have Adam Thielen, who's probably not going to kicked out. I think he could potentially be the slot. I think that Jalen Coker is going to see a reduction potentially in receiving playing time, rather. There's always the chance that I'm wrong, though. But I do think that somebody's going to get squeezed out of this offense. And I do think we need to be a little bit wary, but I do think that he could potentially be a good buy low if that were to happen, because I do think he's talented. And so taking a look at some advanced stats here, is 89th in air yards, 69th in air yard share, 59th in ADOT because he was a big slot, 120th in deep targets, 82nd in red zone targets, 45th in target quality rating, 48th in yards per out run, 42nd in formation adjusted yards per out run, 7th in yards per target, though, very efficient in terms of corralling in. I believe he caught each of the final 10 to 14 of his targets at the end of the season, so very impressive. 19th in yards per reception, pretty impressive considering he was a big slot as well. 53rd in yards per team pass attempt, 48th in target separation, more so a physical guy than necessarily just this dynamic separator, but that's fine. 65th in dominator rating, he had a 9.4% juke rate and a 93.9 explosive rating. And so, like I said, I do think that he has the potential to kind of get crowded out of this offense because somebody's going to have to, based on how many mouths there are to feed now. But I do think that he could potentially be a good buy low because I do think he's talented. Now, when we take a look at his success rates on the bottom left-hand portion of your screen, he was 63rd percentile in success rate versus man. That's impressive. 48th percentile in success rate versus zone. Not particularly great, but I do think that he could stand to improve there, and I think he probably will. And 63rd percentile in success rate versus press. So I was pretty impressed with his ability to beat man and press. Zone could definitely use some work, but like I said, this guy was an undrafted free agent. These numbers are better than some of these other guys that we've spoken about in this video, even if he wasn't misused and he was used the exact way he needed to be used as a big slot. And some of these other guys like Keon Coleman, I really think would have benefited from being a big slot. Now, taking a look at his 17-game pace, remember he only played in 11 games. He would have had 71 targets, 49 receptions, 738 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns, which if we use these general increases in production from year 1 to year 2 for wide receivers, would give him potentially 79 targets, 56 receptions, 863 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns, which would put him as a wide receiver 44 overall back in 2024. I really don't know if we see specifically with him these increases in production, given that they added Ted McMillan. He is a dynamic, true vertical X wide receiver. He can play as a slot, a flanker. I think he has absolute positional versatility. And I do worry that given the lack of draft capital invested in Jalen Coker, being none, that he could be the odd man out this season. If, like I said a couple times now, I do think he could potentially be a very cheap buy low candidate, because as Adam Thielen ages out, I think that he could immediately just step right back into his big slot role, rather. Or there is once again the chance that he keeps it. I like him, and I think you should probably try to buy low if you haven't already. And the final receiver we're going to discuss today is A.D. Mitchell, Adonai Mitchell of the Indianapolis Colts. He was somebody that I was extremely hopeful for, but I was worried about the depth chart, and he got JSN to a degree, but he also definitely had some huge weaknesses. I'll get into some of those later. But taking a look at his athletic profile, he just does not live up to the potential on a down-to-down basis. He shows ridiculous flashes where he looks just like CeeDee Lamb. I mean, he has a 98th percentile 40-yard dash time, a 98th percentile speed score, a 96th percentile burst score. Didn't do the agility drills. I don't think he would have performed relatively well there. He stumbled pretty frequently on the field, but when he didn't, he just looked so dynamic as a vertical X. And he had a 91st percentile catch radius. Now, when we take a look at the stats here, they are just so gross, man. But he was missed so many times by Anthony Richardson and Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco on some of these end zone shots where he was just wide open and he was sailed. Or Anthony Richardson where he would, run it out and up, have like 10 yards of separation, and Anthony Richardson would throw it out of bounds. That was so frustrating. So in a full 17 games, he finished 112th, 55 receptions, 312 yards, and no touchdowns on 13.57 yards per catch. He could have had probably, 900 yards and 6 to 8 touchdowns, and everybody would have been saying how great his rookie season was, but he was missed constantly. And the depth chart, with Alec Pierce being his primary competition in terms of the depth chart being the vertical X on this team, he just doesn't do anything that Alec Pierce doesn't do. And I think Alec Pierce generally has a better feel for zone coverage than AD Mitchell does. It's quite unfortunate. I do think that you can get him for dirt cheap though, and if they get better quarterback play, if they do decide to move on from Alec Pierce, he does have some potential here, but I do think it could be a little bit rocky for him. Moving on to some advanced stats, he finished 57th in air yards, 87th in air yard share, 10th in ADOT, 14.1 yards per reception. Like I said, a vertical X and a dynamic separator against press coverage. 39th in deep targets, 71st in red zone targets, 105th in target quality rating. That should tell you everything you need to know about the quality of his targets. The yards per out run of 1.54 was 65th. He finished 69th in formation adjusted yards per out run, 100th in yards per target, 35th in yards per reception, 101st in yards per team pass attempt, 85th in target separation. So with this guy, he either produces none or a ridiculous amount of target separation. If you watched my film breakdown on him, you would see that time and time again. The dominator rating of 4.3%, however, was only 107th, and I think that kind of just matches up with what we see with his stats here, right? And then his juke rate of 3.7% is accurate in my opinion. He really doesn't make people miss after the catch. He's essentially a very raw CeeDee Lamb before the catch, and then just Tyler Lockett after the catch. An explosive rating of 90. Overall, this rookie year was not as good as I would have hoped, and everything that I feared would happen to him did happen in terms of target competition, poor quarterback play, and just some of the raw and inconsistencies that we saw from him as a collegiate prospect directly translated to the NFL field. And so if you take a look at the bottom left-hand portion of your screen, like I mentioned, he was decent against man coverage, incredible against press, and horrible against zone coverage. And so he had a 43rd percentile success rate versus man, a 14th percentile success rate versus zone, and an 82nd percentile success rate versus press. He is your true vertical X wide receiver. He separates relatively well against man coverage, especially press. He just has a horrible feel for zone coverage. He covers himself instead of uncovers himself consistently there. Now taking a look, he had 55 targets, 23 receptions, 312 receiving yards, and 0 receiving touchdowns. Unfortunately, if we apply these average increases in targets, receptions, yards, and touchdowns, he would still have a horrible season. He would finish with 62 targets, 26 receptions, 365 receiving yards, and 0 receiving touchdowns as the 105th overall wide receiver in 2024. I think that you could potentially try to buy in a year or two. You could buy low now. I think you'll just have to pay less and less as time goes on until we see something with the depth chart, such as them getting a quarterback that's good, Alec Pierce potentially moving on, and definitely some more consistency from AD Mitchell. I do think that he should have had a much better season, and if he had had the ball thrown anywhere, within 10 yards of him with some of these deep shots, we could have a very different general, public perception of his game and his production. But because of the situation, I would probably stay away. He's a very talented player. We just need to see more consistency and growth from him, and definitely need either a quarterback upgrade or at the very least him to see himself rise in the depth chart. And so yeah, that's generally what I thought and what we might be able to expect from some of these second-year wide receivers. With players like Coker, potentially AD Mitchell as well, Xavier Legette potentially. It's just, the target competition is fierce. With Keon Coleman, is he going to continuously be misused? I think so. I like Ricky Pearsall and Xavier Worthy, especially for this next season, and potentially Xavier Legette if he's able to just be a flanker full time. There's definitely pros and cons to each and every single one of these wide receivers. I am pretty hopeful for most of them. If I had to say who I'm most hopeful for, it would probably be Ricky Pearsall and Xavier Worthy in the first tier, then potentially Keon Coleman and Legette in the second tier, and then Coker and AD Mitchell kind of being buried in their depth charts kind of hurts them, in my opinion, especially given the draft capital discrepancy between Coker and Legette. But what do you think? Are you a little bit higher on some of these guys? Let me know below in the comment section. With that being said, feel free to subscribe to my Patreon. I would really appreciate your support. I'm unable to collect any revenue from these due to film breakdowns, as you've seen in many of my videos. Feel free to like and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. I could not do this without you. Thank you, and have a good day.